Hi friends, welcome back to 5 Minute Modern. My name is Cindy, and today we're taking a look at the sublime abstract paintings of Agnes Martin. Martin was born in 1912 in rural Canada, and in her youth she was more interested in athletics than art. She loved the ocean and was a competitive swimmer. In fact, she competed in trials to be on the Canadian Olympic team, narrowly missing the opportunity to be on the team that participated in the infamous 1936 Olympics in Berlin. Though she ended her swimming career in the 1930s, the discipline, repetitiveness, and solitude inherent to swimming would all become defining aspects of her later artwork. In 1931, Martin moved to the United States to take care of her sister Maribel. For a while, Martin moved back and forth between the US and Canada, all while earning a teaching credential. Eventually, Martin went to the Teachers College affiliated with Columbia University in New York, where she began to develop an interest in modern art. After a few itinerant years spent teaching at various schools and working other odd jobs, Martin enrolled at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque to study fine art. Martin's early work consisted of Latin American-influenced figurative paintings and Joan Moreau-like abstractions, works that vastly differed in form and perhaps indicated Martin's wide-ranging search for her own style. Though Martin's time in Albuquerque was impactful, it was relatively short. She eventually returned to Columbia to earn her MFA in art and settled in the city permanently in 1957. By that time, Martin was represented by art dealer Betty Parsons, a leading gallerist of abstract expressionism. Parsons recommended that Martin take up residence in the Coenties Slip. The Slip is a waterfront street near the southern tip of Manhattan, then filled with abandoned warehouses which had been converted into artist lofts. James Rosenquist, Lenore Tawney, Robert Indiana, and Ellsworth Kelly were just a few of the other artists living in the Slip at that time. In contrast to the hyper-masculine abstract expressionist style exemplified by the then recently deceased Jackson Pollock, the artists of the Slip were drawn towards geometric abstraction and pop art. Many of the Slip artists were also gay, and Martin herself is known to have had relationships with fellow Slip artists Lenore Tawney and Chrissa. But for her part, Martin resolutely denied being a lesbian, not least because she insisted on a sort of gender ambiguity, telling at least one interviewer that she wasn't a woman. Today, we might assume Martin to be non-binary, but it's difficult to apply contemporary labels to historical figures when we don't really know how those figures themselves would have identified. Regardless, it was while living at the Slip that Martin began working on the grid paintings for which she is best known. The grids are a bit difficult to see in photo reproductions, and that's by design. Martin would object to producing catalogs of her work throughout her career, insisting that it be seen in person. Martin typically began by painting the canvas, then drew the grids on in pencil, making delicate lines barely discernible from a distance. Martin confined herself to working on a single canvas size, 6 by 6 feet in her early career, shifting to 5 by 5 in her final years. The grid paintings were commonly classed as early minimalist works, though Martin always defined herself as an abstract expressionist. Given this, one might assume that Martin's work expresses deeply held inner passions in line with the turbulent and deeply personal vision of most abstract expressionists. But Martin explained that she wasn't trying to express her interpersonal feelings, but rather universal feelings. Experiences common to all of humanity, like freedom, innocence, and joy. There's no direct representation of nature in her work. Martin famously remarked that she painted with her back to the world, and yet she likened her paintings to the experience of looking out at a landscape. She aimed to capture not the likeness of the landscape itself, but the feeling that a broad open landscape might evoke within all of us. As Martin's star in the art world began to rise, so too did her mental health struggles. She was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and hospitalized several times during the course of the 1960s after entering catatonic trances. Martin had auditory hallucinations, which she termed her voices, and though she insisted she never let them interfere with her art, she seems to have worked to comply with what she perceived to be these voices' instructions in almost all other areas of her life. In 1967, Martin abruptly left New York and would spend the next 18 months on an extended road trip throughout the western US and Canada. At the end of this sojourn, Martin resettled in rural Cuba, New Mexico, on a lot separated from the highway by 20 miles of dirt roads. Martin had always been something of an ascetic, living in a Spartan loft on the Slip, which didn't even have hot water for a time. But the home in Cuba was even more Spartan, consisting of only one room and a detached studio, which Martin constructed herself. After several years of not painting, Martin began again in the early 1970s. Her second act in art was slightly different from the first. She moved from the grids for which she had become known to long horizontal bands, and she expanded her color palette to include soft blues, pinks, and yellows. Many commentators have remarked on the discipline of Martin's rigid lines, but I think there's also a great gentleness to her work. This is most apparent in the balmy color palette of Martin's later paintings. But even when examining her grids, I'm struck by the blend of delicacy and structure in her lines, which make one feel supported but not restrained, gently steadied as though one is lying on a bed of soft grass. In her final years, Martin moved from Cuba to Taos, a small yet vibrant community which had attracted artists for over a century by that point. She made a suite of 7 paintings to be installed in a gallery at the Harwood Museum of Art in Taos, a small skylit space often compared to the Rothko Chapel in Houston. But personally, I prefer Martin's gallery, which trades Rothko's austerity for lightness. If the silence of Rothko's chapel is deafening, in Martin's gallery, it's silence as I most often experience it, a blessing of absence. In her final work of art, Martin made a simple line drawing of a potted plant. The line shows the shakiness of age, but the modest sketch retains the spare softness that defines Martin's work for me. Martin died in 2004, months after completing her final drawing. Prohibited from interring Martin near the Harwood Museum by state regulations, a group of Martin's friends nonetheless snuck into museum grounds at midnight one night to scatter her ashes under an apricot tree on the museum grounds. Martin, who painted with her back to the world but with her heart open to its wonder, returned to the nature whose joys she captured in her work. Thanks so much for watching this one. As always, I hope you enjoyed the video and I hope you learned something new. Please remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.